Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Apocatastasis, an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. This recording is the latest installment of A Conversation With. Today with repeat offender Dylan Moore. How are you doing, Dylan?
I'm doing excellent. Coming to you from my basement.
Very good.
Hiding from my kids. I got a brand new baby and couldn't get out of the house.
Well, thank you in with those obligations for meeting us again. Dylan, of course, and I spoke quite a bit this past autumn over Irida TV and getting to know each other. And then more lately, through the winter, Dylan presented for some of our students and our school community on the 3-2 shift and logical self-defense, and a lot of really, really valuable insights in those wintertime presentations. And here we are, assured by groundhogs in Connecticut and Pennsylvania that the spring is upon us, and it sure feels that way today. How warm is it out west there, Dylan? We got 6 degrees in Connecticut. What do you got?
I don't know what it is outside, but it's a little nippy.
Okay.
February is famous here for, okay, the sun's finally coming out. It's starting to get warm. Okay, and then boom. 20 degrees, snow. And then comes back up and boom. So
don't get your hopes up too high.
It's been the warmest winter I've ever remembered in Washington State. So I'll take what I can get.
Right. Yes. By way of announcement here, before we let Dylan do a quick intro for those viewers who are unfamiliar with Dylan and Irida TV, and we set up for where we're going for today, just the one announcement concerning Apocatastasis, and that is to take a look at Apocatastasis Press. We have a number of books coming online, and just this semester we've published The Murder Machine, which is Patrick Pearce's look superficially at the British educational system in Ireland. But as I wrote in the introduction to that reprint from 100 years ago, his insights into state education and the role it plays in deforming or shifting culture is profound and is just as applicable today in other countries as it was in his time and place. So you can check out that at Apocatastasis Institute.wordpress.com. You can see the publishing tab at the top of the screen there. All right, Dylan, tell us a bit about yourself for those unfamiliar, and about Irida TV, and then we'll go from there into our topic for today.
Well, my name is Dylan Moore. I don't know how. Nothing about my stories in a straight line, but I guess to keep it short and simple, I'm currently in a business acquisition phase of my life. I've been acquiring businesses in the healthcare industry. I'm working on buying a new business right now. And my educational background's in chemistry. And I studied various different languages. And the only one I ever got good at was German, which is the only one I didn't actually study. And so I shouldn't say I've never taken a history class. I never took a history class after high school, because I hated history. I've never taken an economics class, and I've never taken a logic class. And those are the 3 things that I really like to talk about.
I figure.
So it's come from a lot of self-study. And the approach I usually try to take on things is, even if I don't have an academic background in the subject, well, first of all, not having an academic background in a subject often is a boon. It's a benefit, because you don't come with whatever preloaded assumptions and agenda that whatever institution you've learned it from wants to communicate to you. And by being able to come at it from a different angle, I think has allowed me to say, okay, I think these are the core concepts that even if I don't understand or I'm not aware of the entirety of the subject, I can see that these core concepts challenge the standing institutional knowledge. And if that's true, then the details that hover around the core concepts don't really matter if those core concepts are incorrect. So I like to, and I guess today the focus is going to be on history, is, what's the purpose of history? Like you just like you just were talking about, okay, here's this history of Ireland, from the 19th century or something?
Yeah, early 20th century, 1913.
Yeah, on one level, who cares? But if we step back and go, okay, hey, wait a minute, here's the method by which this tool, the system, was used as a weapon, and is there a corollary between the current tool that we have right now that we can help understand, the current situation to help us make useful decisions to improve it, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into Carroll Quigley, and this is one of the things that Carroll Quigley mentions in the book we're going to discuss right at the beginning, is that is it the job of a historian to just collect facts? Fact this, fact that. Here, this is what happened, that's what happened, this is what happened, that's what happened. Or is it the job of a historian to analyze facts in order to project into the future? And I like the way that Quigley puts it, is he says, I want to make historical executives, not historical clerics.
Ah, nice.
Right. And he puts together a what I would call a scientific hypothesis of understanding history, which I guess we can discuss today. And historians typically don't try to do this. They say it's social science, so you can't do an F equals MA like you could in physics in social science, so don't even bother. And Quigley comes back and says, I recognize that it's more difficult because now that we have individual actors making free will decisions, you can't just say F equals MA. However, when you step back and you look at when these people start acting in aggregate, you start to see patterns and you can make predictions from these patterns. So and then he spends the rest of the book, we'll talk about evolution of civilizations, showing, backing up what he said. And he's most famous for the book Tragedy and Hope. Yes. Which is a great book. And for whatever reason, most people tend to focus on page 950 out of the 1,300 freaking pages that are in this book, right? They focus on page 950 where he says, hey, there's a conspiracy and I agree with what they want to do, but I don't agree how they're going to do it. And everyone jumps up and down and goes, look, here it is. Here's a conspiracy. Here's a conspiracy. And I'm not saying there's not value to that, but they ignore the other 1,300 pages of the book, which are incredibly profound, potent historical understanding of all sorts of stuff. And if you don't read Evolution of Civilizations first, you don't see what he's doing in Tragedy and Hope. And I think there's value simply in the historical understanding that he puts forward in Tragedy and Hope, and honestly understanding what he puts, the hypothesis that he has in Evolution of Civilizations, I think is what differentiates the historical executive from the historical cleric.
Great. Thank you for that, Dylan. And for the audience, so you understand, I will put, so you understand how this particular talk developed, I will put the conversation between Dylan and myself, the first one that we did, where he introduces this. And you speak about pride going before the fall. And here I am. I think I'm such a big shot. I actually read Tragedy and Hope, and I did it twice, which is probably more than most people who buy that book. I see it on their shelves.
I punched myself once, and I figured I'd punch myself.
Yeah, something like that. So here I am with a big old head, and I didn't even know Quigley had this key to understanding Tragedy and Hope. And not that it isn't printed, of course, on the first, on the published by or authored by. It was there, but I never picked it up. And what an interesting take as I was preparing for our time together, Dylan. So, can you flesh out for the audience a little bit about Quigley and then this evolution of civilizations? What's his thesis?
I'm no expert on Quigley himself. That my understanding is that at some point he became the official historian for the Council on Foreign Relations, and he had access to archives that the rest of us don't get to access. And the story goes something like this, which is he had access to all this information and he started publishing it when he shouldn't have. And he got in trouble for that. That's my very quick roundabout understanding for it. And at some point, particularly with Tragedy and Hope, it went through. It wasn't supposed to go through the publishing process, and they actually destroyed the plates to make the book because somebody went, "Whoa, wait a minute! This guy wasn't supposed to do this," right? And I remember hearing an interview where, near the end of his life, he was actually pretty upset that.
Yes, he was.
So, in Evolution of Civilizations, when and he beautifully leads up to this concept in the book we don't really have time to get into. But I think it's one important point that he brings up at the beginning is that Quigley originally was a biochemistry major.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yes.
And I don't remember what year in college, junior year or something, he decided to switch from biochemistry to history. And the reason I think that's important is that this guy comes from the angle of hard science coming into history, right? So when he talks about the scientific method and the implications of science, he started in science and then went to history. He didn't start in history and then dabble in science. And he mentions at the beginning what I already talked about, which is, okay, is the purpose of history to be a cleric and just collect facts, or is the purpose of history to reach an understanding from those facts? And he makes a jab at most historians, which is pretty funny right at the beginning of the book, as he says, the historians that say that it's impossible to draw conclusions from the facts, for some reason, don't stop being historians. Like, if you're going to be a historian, but you admit that you can't draw any conclusions, why are you even in the industry, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And so he says that, again, reiterating what I said earlier, his hypothesis is that it's more difficult in the social sciences to come up with F equals MA, for example, right? But it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a core idea that he brings up, which is that because human beings create organizations, they create societal structures, and they create it for everything. We have schools, we have businesses, we have banks, we have churches, we have sports, we have government. We have all these different organizations that are there to achieve a specific purpose, right? What's the purpose of? He's telling me I'm pronouncing this wrong, but I don't believe him. The Apocatastasis Institute.
You're doing good. That's a fine pronunciation. The purpose of Apocatastasis is to not create and perpetuate parasitic social orders, and our way to do that is not to train children to be future parasites.
We have an organization with a purpose. Now, we can then, if we're historians and we want to analyze the Apocatastasis Institute, we can look at the history of it and we can say, okay, does the actions of the Apocatastasis Institute help achieve the goal, the stated goal, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. But here's if it feels like you are, because we're having this conversation the way we're having the conversation, right? But then we could say, okay, let's say the Apocatastasis Institute gets bigger and bigger, and it's 100 years old now. It's 200 years old now. It's bigger and bigger and bigger, and we say, okay, what is it doing now?
Yes.
And how does that compare to its original stated goal? And Quigley's fundamental premise is that the organization, through natural factors, and I'll discuss those natural factors, will inevitably develop vested interests that are more interested in serving themselves than they are in achieving whatever the original goal is, that the resources that go toward the organization achieve the goal less and less efficiently because the vested interests are eating those resources or putting those resources toward themselves, where the original goal at best becomes secondary or at worst becomes contradictory to what the organization is doing now.
So many examples of this, but the obvious one that jumps to mind is these charitable institutions like the Red Cross or whatnot, where most of the money goes to administration and advertising, and how much actually trickles down to Joe Blow who needs it.
Right. Well, for me, I think the media is like the best when we look at the beginning and the end, right? So let's just theoretically step back and go, okay, what is the purpose of media? News media, journalism, right? Yes. What is the purpose of media? Well, I think a reasonable person would say, well, the purpose of the media is to keep the citizenry informed about what's going on in the society, sure, particularly from the political angle of things, right? Yes. Okay, that's the purpose of media. And what do we have now? Well, what we have now is a media that actively prevents people from understanding what's going on in society, right? Yeah. And then if we look at the vested interests, I mean, I think I was watching the Jimmy Dore show that found out that what's his name, Anderson Cooper, the obnoxious dude with the white hair on CNN.
Yes, he lives not very far from here. Actually, he lives just off the street.
I bet you're proud of that. Well, I mean, his salary is something like $12 million a year or something, and something like $10 million of it is paid by Pfizer.
Yes.
Well, no wonder he says the vaccines are great and that ivermectin is horse paste and all this sort of stuff. Where the primary purpose is to feed himself, right? The primary purpose of the organization now is to feed itself. And this original purpose of informing the populace will actually hurt him, right?
Yes, yes.
So the original purpose of the media is now contradictory to its goals now, right? Yeah. Now Quigley says his hypothesis is that this process and the terms that he uses are instrument and institution. When the organization is achieving its stated goal, it's an instrument. When it develops the vested interests and starts feeding itself, it becomes an institution. Mm-hmm. This happens to any and every social organization. Any and every social organization. And his hypothesis is there's 3 reasons. And we're going to see how well I remember these 3 reasons. I don't have the book in front of me. So the first reason is that within an organization, nobody has the job of making sure that the organization is achieving its goal. My job is the bookkeeping. My job is to pick up the phone.
Yes.
My job is to cook for everybody. My job is to do sales. There's nobody has the job that sits back and goes, okay, wait a minute. What's the purpose of this organization, and are we making sure that happens, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first part. The second part is that every individual is naturally looking out to improve their situation. Mm-hmm. And often the improvement of the individual is the disprovement. It's the wrong word, I understand, but you see what I'm saying. The disprovement of the or the unimprovement of the organization as a whole. I want a better salary, right? I want to be higher up in the hierarchy. I want more power. And I mean, we can mix in like sociopathy and narcissism into this and maybe in a future conversation. But even if that is removed, when I'm arguing for, hey, boss, I think you should give me a better salary for this reason, the reason's not because of the purpose of the organization, right? And so everybody within the organization is making these little individual decisions to naturally improve their own situation, right? Now, as that happens, we get into number 3, which is the thing I've been saying the whole time, is that at some point, let me rewind. So the organization is created when culture is doing whatever it's doing. Mm-hmm. Culture naturally changes, right? Yeah. And changes within the culture might have a negative result for that organization, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, let me see if I can. Very clear example. We've got a military. The military gets paid when there's war. Yes. We're all at peace right now. Uh-oh. How are we going to get paid? Right? Yep. So now we have a vested interest that's interested in things not changing.
Yes. Yes.
So with the military example, we have a vested interest in making sure that war keeps going so we can feed the military industrial complex, right? An example for the media, we have a vested interest in making sure that shows like this get canceled and censored. Otherwise, we're going to lose our control and we won't be able to control the narrative, which is what we need to do to feed ourselves. Mm-hmm. Right?
In the evolution of civilization and the chapter on Western civilization, just to buttress what you're saying, Dylan, he uses, Quigley that is, uses the example of the late feudal period. He goes through the different periods of medieval history, and at a certain point, the feudal order with the knights and so forth became outdated, and you had the rise of the cities, and that the cultural change, the rise of the bourgeoisie, and a whole bevy of assumptions that were not just economically clashing with the previous feudal order, but also the Christianity at that point as well. And so you had all of these tensions and trying to prop up the feudal order on the part of the vested interest.
Let's look at that specifically, because I think that's a great example. So first of all, where did the feudal order come from? The feudal order came from, once the Roman Empire collapsed in the West, security was a huge issue, and access to food was a huge issue, because in Rome, Rome itself, the city, was this huge city that if it didn't have massive amounts of food being brought to it, it couldn't support the people. So as the empire started to collapse, the people started getting further and further out to get close enough to land which could produce some food. And then on a security level, the most effective weapon at the time turned into the mounted knight on horseback. Now, it takes roughly, at the time, 50, there's Quigley's numbers, 50 to 100 people working in food to support one mounted knight on horseback. So both because for security reasons, we need to get close to someone who could defend us, and for food production reasons, we got to get out of the city. You start ending up with a situation where you get all these people working the land to support one military unit. Now, on top of that, because the that was the most effective weapon, in a broad sense, you could say the castle was also the most effective weapon at the time in terms of defending your position. Well, a castle obviously can't beat a knight. It just sits there. And for most of the time, the knight can't really beat the castle. It's too defensible. And if you multiply that with the fact that you had this vassalage going on, where, okay, if I'm the king and I need to raise an army of 5,000 people, I don't have 5,000 messengers to go send out. I have 5. Well, I send that to the barons, and then the barons have lords, and so okay, you 25 people, you owe me a certain amount of people, and then those 25 people have, okay, here's all my knights that owe me a certain amount of service, right, or whatever. And the at the end of the day, everybody owed the king maybe 40 days out of the year or whatever of military service. Well, you got 40 days to conquer that other kingdom and beat that castle. You can't beat it in 40 days. They can just hold up and 40-day siege. We're good. So you end up in the situation where nobody can really dominate the other. So I'm use this term in quotes. You get this anarchy. You have no central governmental system because nobody can conquer anybody else. However, the functioning unit is that these manors become self-sufficient. And they become trading with each other, and the knight does actually provide security for the serfs that serve the knight, right?
Yes.
We fast forward, and then the initial economic system that develops is manors trading luxury goods with each other, right? Now we fast forward to what you just said. Now we have the bourgeoisie, which is bourgeoisie. I pronounced the R in the French. My bad. We've got the bourgeoisie that are now facilitating the commercial trade. The old system's out, but all these knights are still sitting around, and they're broke. What do we do? And on top of that, there was my understanding is that there was a cultural idea that a knight should not get involved with commercial activity. It's kind of beneath sort of thing, right? So I'm broke. I don't have like these serfs that I tax in the same way that I used to before. How do I make money? Well, and I'm not allowed to engage in the trade industry. I got to fight, and so now we have a reason that leads to all these imperialist wars and conflict happening all the time. So to your point, we have the instrument of feudalism. Which, I'm not saying is a good thing, but it worked, right? Becomes institutionalized into what Quigley says is chivalry, where the original purpose of the feudal lord was to provide protection to the serf, and now all he does is cause war in order to have some way to pay himself.
Yeah, and I think Quigley uses, amongst other examples, the 100 Years' War between France and England as an example of staying busy, keeping, if everything's a hammer, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that sort of thing.
Well, and then there was another, I believe it was at the beginning of the book, but it's talking about this period in history. I think it was the 1200s. I'd have to read the book again and check that the English military started incorporating longbowmen. And there was a battle with France that still had the mounted knight on horseback. And of course, the longbowmen shred up the mounted knights on horseback. And the French didn't immediately, you and I are going, well, we need our own longbowmen. Oh my God, what's going on, right? The French didn't immediately do that because, first of all, there was a institutionalized military system of, no, this is the way that we do things. And there was also possibly this idea of it was incomprehensible that a low-born person could kill a high-born person at a distance.
Yes.
And so the social organization of the military was not able to adjust itself to the new technology because it was institutionalized. So, did you have something?
No. I had a thought, but keep on with your bit there.
Well, I was going to go back to the premise to dissect it a little bit more.
Please.
Okay. So now the book Evolution of Civilizations, he brings up this idea because he says, okay, when we're defining civilizations, a civilization has a particular institution, or excuse me, a particular instrument that defines it, that he calls the instrument of expansion, right? And then he goes into analyzing these various civilizations based on his theory. And he says we can measure the different phases of civilization, and he brings up 7 by whatever is happening with this instrument of expansion. Not talking about that for a second. I'm just looking at the idea as it applies to any sort of social organization at all. So there's 3 things to do when an instrument becomes institutionalized. So we've got this instrument that used to achieve a thing. Now it's got vested interests that are feeding itself, and you still got to pay for the thing as the citizenry, right? But you're getting less and less back from the instrument that it gave you at the beginning, right? So there's 3 ways to respond to this, or I should say there's 2 ways to respond to it, and there's 3 things that can happen. The first is you can either try to reform the institution to get it either back to doing what it was supposed to be doing, or maybe society has moved on to the point where we don't need any organization that does that, so it goes on to achieve something else. Or we can circumvent it, where we create a new organization that achieves the thing that society needs, and the old thing either falls away or just becomes decrepit and honorary. An example that he gives is in England, at least at the time of writing the book, there was some Earl of wherever who, historically speaking, he was in charge of the Navy.
Okay.
He's clearly not in charge of the Navy anymore, but you still have the Earl of whatever with the same title and landed estate, right? Yes. So he still exists. He's completely institutionalized. He still takes some modicum of resources, but it's not enough that anybody cares about, and you just shove him over in the corner, right? So there's the possibility of reform, where you go inside the institution and fix it. Circumvention, you get around it. And in the case that either of these are attempted, if they fail, he quickly calls that, I think it was reaction. Was it reaction? Whatever. Failure for the sake of this conversation, right? Is that the institution ends up winning, and it pushes away either the attempt to reform or the new circumventing organization, in which case that's what you don't want. Yes. Right? Unless you're the vested interest that's benefiting from that. So just this week, was it yesterday? The day before yesterday, yes. I interviewed somebody in the Miami-Dade school system in Florida who's attempting to create a new teachers union to replace the current teachers union, which has become corrupt. And I'm like, this is a perfect example of what of this idea in practice. right? Here's this guy. He's attempting to circumvent the old institution, because the old institution, and I talked about this in Carroll Quigley in terms.
Yeah.
I said, what's the purpose of a teachers organization, or a teachers union? Is the current teachers union achieving that goal? How would yours achieve that goal? Right. And then furthermore, how will you prevent, presuming you win, your organization from becoming institutionalized? I didn't use this terminology because I didn't have time to, bring up the evolution of civilizations.
Yes.
But he had an answer to that, and it's exciting to see that this is what's in practice, which brings me to the point that I want to get at, which is that even though Quigley, and he says this specifically, even though Quigley says this is a natural process that happens with any organization, it does not mean it's deterministic.
Yes.
That doesn't mean it has to happen. And I think this is so important because it's so easy. The modern term now is to become black-pilled, right? It's so easy to become fatalistic and despair and say, okay, well, this is the way that historical forces happen. Therefore, I can't resist it. Even though when you have groups of people, you start to being able to chart them mathematically, there is still room for individual actors making free will choices. So if we go back to the three things that I said that caused the institutionalization of instruments, which was it's nobody's job to direct, remind everybody what the purpose of the organization is. Everybody looks out for their own gain, and then you develop, and because of this, you develop a vested interest that is not interested in the culture changing. Well, I think at the first and foremost, at the very beginning, if you do have somebody that says, okay, here's our organization, and our organization's goal is to achieve this purpose, that in and of itself really changes what's going on. And I'm actually a student of Dan Pena. Who, if you know who that is, you know who that is. If you don't,
could you spell that last name, Dylan? Or would you be comfortable spelling that?
Pena, and there's a squiggle over the end. It's
okay.
Spanish last name. Who teaches people how to do business acquisitions. And one of the things that he talks about, if you read he's got a book that he wrote called Your First 100 Million. And he said that whenever he had a business, he talked about strategy and structure. Is that typically in any business, they have a structure and they try to follow a strategy within that structure. And he said, in my businesses, we didn't do that. I put strategy first and we organize the structure around it. Your job's this one day, we got a better strategy. Your job's that the next day. And when I remember reading that, and I'm like, this is exactly what Quigley was talking about. In Pena's terms, a strategy versus structure. If you have strategy that follows structure, well, you're on the path to institutionalization. If you have structure following strategy, now maybe you can still get institutionalized because what's your strategy, what's your goal, right? But if you have structure following strategy, then the vested interests, the processes that I just defined, they're not on this slide. You know what I mean? This deterministic slide of what's going to happen, because you got the top management going, all of you get reorganized at any time, depending on what we need to do and what your skill set is. Right? So I think if we want to look at putting ourselves back into, do we have free will? Because it boils down to free will. And if putting this in the context of the intellectual self-defense presentations that I gave, part 3, the chain of responsibility, I talked heavily about free will. Is that there's a very strange thing. Maybe it's not strange, but I'm going to use the word strange. There's a very strange thing that happens about free will. Is the more that you think you seem to have it, the more you seem to get. And the less you seem to think you have it, the less you seem to get. The more you go, I'm just in this universe of predetermined forces, and what am to resist that? You kind of just become this leaf in the wind, versus if you think, hey, I'm in this universe that has these forces, but I can adjust, I can work with and change directions of these forces. Suddenly you have the power to do that, right?
Lo and behold.
And if we approach what I just said about this institutionalization of instruments with the latter idea of I have free will to make adjustments, yes, these forces are natural and they're happening a certain way, but okay, gravity's a natural force, things fall. Well, okay, I can work with that and invent an airplane. Yeah. Right? I can work with that and invent a spaceship to get us into orbit, right? So just understanding that these are forces that we have the free will to act upon allows us to say we don't have to submit to the fact that it's happening. And I think the guy that I interviewed this week, the show's already up, is a perfect example of I feel that I could change this. And I also think it's really important to point out, I pointed this out to him, is that there is a weakness. Any institution, by definition, has a weakness, which is what I just described. They need more and more resources to achieve the same thing because there's so many people gobbling up the resources for themselves personally. Mm-hmm. I've heard this about the situation in Russia right now, and I don't know how much of this is propaganda, but for the sake of argument, let's just assume that it's true. Yeah. Is that, and I mean, this makes sense in terms of Russian history, particularly post-Soviet, right? So we got this war that's happening in Ukraine. Obviously, there's going to be a certain military budget that Russia has. Is that the guy in charge of the military? So he receives the budget and is in charge of making sure it gets spent. Is like personally pocketing like 1/3 of that budget.
Okay.
And then everywhere down the line, everybody it tries to steal whatever they can. I mean, again, I don't know how much of this is propaganda and what's true, but like, for example, soldiers who are in charge of a tank and they get a certain fuel allotment will sell that fuel to local people in order to, yes. I mean, it's just like every aspect of it is people stealing. Wow. Right? Okay. Therefore, when Putin, maybe he doesn't even know this is going on because from what I understand, he's got a pretty narrow information conveyor belt that comes to him, right? Maybe he doesn't even know that this is going on. Is Putin says, okay, here's 100 billion rubles or whatever to go toward this military effort. Well, only 20 billion makes it at the end. Yeah. Right? So I would suggest similarly going back to the teacher union battle that's about to happen that's happening in Miami-Dade County in Florida right now. Okay, the current union is overbloated. They've got however many millions of frickin' dollars to go to do battle with. I mean, they're doing stuff like this. This is what the guy told me, is that they're saying all sorts of crazy things about him. You know, he's a right-wing conspiracy theorist. He's got billionaires supporting him and blah, 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 all this sorts of stuff. And don't even talk to this guy. He's crazy. And he can't even send emails to the faculty. And there's like 30,000 people within this union in the area, right? I mean, it's a big union. He can't send emails because they have IT guys blocking his frickin' emails. So he can't even communicate with them. Yes. Right? So, however, okay, so they've got multi-million frickin' whatever budget to do whatever they're doing. And I'm sure, you know, every time he gets a $5 donation, he's like, thank you with the $5, right? What he can do with that $5 costs them $50,000 to do. Right? Yes. And I mean, this is what we've seen, say, in Afghanistan that happened both to the Soviet Union and to the United States. Is you come in with this massive modern equipment that says, okay, we can kill everybody. Okay, well, you've got your $20 million jet that can be taken out by a $5,000 rocket. Yes. Right. And I mean, what's the moniker? Afghanistan is where empires go to die. Yes, right. Seems to be that way. I mean, I guess you can just go back thousands of years in history to see that this is the fact. But these are all different ways of showing that, like, once the institution, yeah, it's big, yes, it's monolithic, yes, it's very, very powerful, but it costs them so much resources to achieve whatever they want to achieve that somebody coming up, typically circumvention. Quigley does make the point that circumvention is always easier to do than reform. Like having a new organization as opposed to reforming the old organization. That okay, they're small, but their resources pack a much more powerful punch than the institution. Yeah, often I because they still have that fire in the belly from the earlier parts of the stages. Well, and they don't have we're getting down to the Institute of Expansion, right? But the that $5 that they have, they actually spend it on achieving something. As opposed to, okay, $4 of these dollars need to go to paying me, first off. Right? I got a really expensive dinner tonight. The next needs to go. That sort of stuff. They don't have that going on.
Yes.
Right.
Two things strike me as you take your water there, Dylan. In Connecticut, just by the by, I was shocked, but I shouldn't be shocked. With the teachers union here, they came to an agreement with the state of Connecticut for an arbitrator. So this was like giving up the nuclear weapons for Libya or something. The union in Connecticut completely defanged itself and it waived its right to go on strike in order to.
Is that the whole purpose of the union?
Exactly. But they wanted they wanted to buddy up with Hartford, and they agreed to all this arbitration garbage. And then the other thing about institutions is I've seen this happen over the past 20 years. The midwives, the midwives,
like the
birthing,
that helped deliver my baby. Like what? Yeah. Those ones. In Connecticut, they swore, and I think this is probably happening across the country. 20 years ago, I remember in high school and college, I knew some of these people, and they swore by the sun and the moon and the stars. We'll never become part of the AMA, Rockefeller Medicine. They're the enemy. We're never going to sell out like them. And now they've all gone in the 20 years. They've gone in for licensing, and now they're pissing on all the people who don't have licenses through them. It's the same thing. And Brent Urbanik, that's the guy who I interviewed. He said he suspects. I mean, I can't prove this one way or the other, but I think this elucidates the point. Is he suspects that the school district, which is not the union, right? That the school district has bought off the union leaders.
Yes.
Now I have no idea if that's true or not, but I mean that would be a perfect example of why. I mean, maybe that's what happened with the teachers union in Connecticut. Like, why would you just roll over and die? Well, maybe the people up top who are rolling over and dying are getting paid by people to tell them I don't know, right? But it could be something like that.
Absolutely. Now, I had a point I wanted to bring up about Toynbee. Is there anything you wanted to go on as you were laying things out here, Dylan?
Bring up Toynbee, who I've never read, so we'll see how much I can comment on that.
Right. Well, I this is just developing our knowledge of this topic with historiography and with Quigley and everything. So you had mentioned earlier on that Quigley had been part of what we call the CFR now, and so had Toynbee, and in many respects, Quigley, in certain respects, Quigley built off of Toynbee, who wrote a 25 volume study of history series, more academic than the story of civilization, but the same sort of idea. But Toynbee was hired by what was called Chatham House then, or the CFR, and they were asking, could you? This was his commission. I mean, they were asking, could you study civilizations to see why they rise and fall, and if one could somehow survive.
Okay, I remember we talked about this in non-recorded.
Yeah.
Totally.
And just briefly, as my appreciation for Quigley is growing and so forth, what I'd like to throw out as my conclusion, tentatively, is that what Quigley. Quigley, in many respects, as you're laying this out, sounds a lot like Toynbee with these cycles and comparing all these civilizations, and even, he's the same paymasters and the same, thesis. He's trying to figure out, could we have a civilization that doesn't fall? But Toynbee, and here's the punch where I'm going with this, and you can jag on it as you like. Toynbee's whole idea with the rise and fall of civilization, he looked at dozens of them in these volumes, is that there's, when you have a group of people, and then as time goes on, they get long in the tooth, maybe in the way we've been describing, and then there's always the outside pressure of the barbarians, as he calls it, of some sort. Mm-hmm. There's the outside pressure, and then there's often an inside proletariat, the internal proletariat, he calls it, not in a Marxist sense, but there's a disgruntled group. And more or less, history can be understood by either the barbarians breaching the civilization from the outside, and it doesn't always have to be military. It could be ideological, technological, or there's some internal group that's dissatisfied, like the slave classes in Rome, right? And then they latch onto Christianity, and it grows and it grows and grows, and so that's your Toynbee there. And Quigley, what Quigley seems to build off of Toynbee's shoulders is that this point of institutions that you're bringing up. He seems to be like a microscope, more focused on the concept of social institutions as the engine where these dynamics play out.
Yes. What's your question?
Well, that wasn't so much a question as an observation, as we're learning more about these scholars.
I mean, I do remember. I mean, like I said, I haven't read Toynbee, but I have read Carroll Quigley criticizing Toynbee and bringing him up.
Yes, go on.
Is that, and this is at the beginning of Evolution of Civilizations, is that he, if I remember correctly, essentially says something that, Toynbee made a good stab at it, but he still didn't give a reason why this is happening the way it is.
Yes, I see.
And because there's kind of this old adage, right, that hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And that's being thrown all around the memosphere right now, and it has been for several years, because, oh my God, America's like Rome, we're at the end stages, blah, 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 whatever, which I completely disagree with. I don't know if we have time to get into that.
Yeah, I want to get there next, yes.
But Quigley brings that up, and he goes, this still doesn't describe anything. And he says there's multiple examples throughout history where a group faces challenges and they overcome it. And then there's other examples where the group faces challenges and they don't overcome it. This adage doesn't explain what's going on. And
that's a big aspect to Toynbee too that I neglected. This whole idea of the challenge, this whole equation of the challenge he has.
Yeah, and what Quigley says is, he says, I'm thinking how much I'm going to have to describe here, is that when we look at civilizations, first of all, you have to define the civilization. And it's not something that we can just say, okay, civilization, here's your 1 or 2 sentence description, and that defines it. Is we kind of have to build up certain concepts. So by the time we say, okay, what is civilization? Well, the definition I'm using includes the concepts that I had to work up to in order to get here in the first place, right? And until we do that, we don't know if we're comparing apples to apples. And I think one of the important things in terms of Quigley's description of civilizations is, for example, people talk about Roman civilization. Quigley would say, no, that's Roman society. Roman society conquered classical civilization. It was a piece of classical civilization. And then, okay, we have American civilization. No, there is no such thing as American civilization. There's American society within Western civilization. Okay. Now, what's the core component of the civilization? He says that I mentioned this earlier, I'll describe it more now. The core component of a civilization is its instrument of expansion. What is the instrument of expansion? To put it as quickly as I can, is somehow a society, through whatever accident gets it there, is able to create a surplus, typically in food, right? I mean, going back to the beginning, it's always food is the surplus, right? It creates a surplus in food. It's able to save that surplus, and then it reinvests that surplus into capital, which allows it to create an even bigger surplus. They can save and reinvest in the capital, right? If we go back to ancient Sumeria, when I say this, remember that this book is written in the 60s, so the facts of ancient Sumeria have been much more fleshed out and developed in the past 60 years, right? So this is going based on what he said in the book, is that the original instrument of expansion of Mesopotamian civilization was the priesthood, because the priesthood had figured out the connection between the stars and the floods, because the floods brought life by regenerating the soil, but they also brought death, because if you didn't get out of the way in the time, it took you out. So the fact that they were able to figure out how to predict the floods, and of course they guarded the secret, right? And that allowed the people to create that surplus, and then they say, okay, well, we communicate with the gods. The gods tell us when the floods are going to be here, so you need to help us communicate to the gods by giving us tribute, right? Now, so the peasantry, or whatever you call them back in ancient Mesopotamia, they're creating the surplus. The priesthood is saving it. And at the beginning, they reinvest it into stuff like irrigation, right? The irrigation helps the expansion by, okay, we're creating more surplus, you guys are saving it, and we're reinvesting it, right? Now, I think it's worth pointing out, it's not like everybody benefits in this sort of situation. There's slaves here that you don't necessarily get to participate in the surplus, even though you're part of the people creating.
Yes.
Well, this isn't that everybody gets to benefit within the society. This is that the society is growing, right? It's developing, it's expanding. Now, the priests start letting the power go to their head. And okay, let's spend this on lots of slaves. Let's spend this on lots of wives. Let's spend this on let's spend this on ostentatious display and social honors and so now all the people in Mesopotamian civilization, they're still having to pay the tribute. They're still having to pay their surplus. But what they're getting back is not the same amount. Yes. So Quigley says, as we go through these stages of civilization, you got the stage of what he calls mixture, which is two societies come together, and because they're mixing, they create a third society. And if by the sake of lucky super duper chance, and this is very rare, that new society develops a instrument of expansion, which would happen in phase 2, which is gestation, which is these societies are now mixing and creating a third society out of it. You get stage 3, which is the age of expansion. The age of expansion happens, and once the rate of expansion begins to slow, you enter the age of conflict. And now we're not saying that we're not still expanding. You need some calculus here. It's the second derivative becomes negative for anybody who's the acceleration begins to slow down, even though you're still technically moving forward, right? Once that starts happening, you start entering the age of conflict, where compare this to modern day. If we were boomers, we could go to high school, get a job, maybe go to college, get an even better job, raise a family, and be able to retire.
Take up cruises.
Yeah, if I participate in what society tells me I should participate in, I get rewarded.
Yes.
Fast forward that to now. I'm old now. I'm a millennial. Right now we have Gen Z, but the millennials got hit with this. Gen Z's getting hit harder with it, but we got hit with it too. Is that okay? I went to school. I got the good grades. I got the degree, and I graduated. And 2008 crash happens, and now I'm in student debt for the rest of my life that I could never pay off with this fake degree that I got. Right? I'm punished for participating in what society told me to participate in.
And then you just like kind of get standing on your legs, and then boom, COVID-19 knocks you down. Again.
So how many kids am I having? How much am I getting married?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
then the whole time you have boomers laughing at you for being a loser.
Right.
You generic, there's all that.
Taking that aside, what I'm saying is the population growing? No. Where's the surplus coming from? I'm not working because the main reason I want to work is because I have a wife that I need to pay for because she's 10 times as expensive as I am as a male, first off. And then I have kids, and those are even more expensive. So I got to get out and build civilization to support all this crap, right? Well, none of that's going on. Not none. But, right, you see what I'm saying is that when the benefit of participating in what society has told you to participate in gets lower and lower and lower and lower. So going back to ancient Mesopotamia, this is what we see is you participating in what's going on is giving you less and less benefit. And now you get more and more people that are upset and have nothing to do and are disgruntled. What do you do with them? Send them to war.
Send them to the wars.
Send them to war. This accomplishes 2 things. 1, you kill some of them. And you don't have to feed them. Right? Second, hopefully you can get booty, which comes back and pays for what's going on. Now, that actually works for a short amount of time, right? Okay, this is bringing in the resources that we need to continue the lifestyle that we had, but it does nothing to address the fundamental problem, which is that the instrument of expansion has institutionalized, right? So at some point, you keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And typically what happens, and Quigley says this doesn't necessarily have to happen, but it usually happens, is that there's a society on the periphery of the civilization that conquers the whole thing. Rome, for example, would be the thing that conquered classical civilization. Persia is what ultimately conquered Mesopotamian civilization. The Incas ultimately conquered Andean civilization. The Aztecs ultimately conquered Mesoamerican civilization. And the whole disease thing aside, this is actually one of the reasons why the Spaniards were able to steamroll them, is because these two civilizations were at their end stages.
Or Islam coming to the Byzantines and the Persians too in the 7th century comes to mind.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. The Ottoman Empire conquers the whole Islamic civilization.
Yes.
The Tokugawa shogunate conquers the whole of Japanese civilization.
And then you have 19th century colonial, or actually, well, after World War I, you have the Western civilization knocking over the Ottomans on the margins. Yes.
Right. And I mean, then we're getting into the future of like, okay, what comes out after that? That's a different conversation. But so we've entered stage 5, which is called Universal Empire. Now, what's interesting about Universal Empire, let's go to Rome. Rome conquers all of classical civilization. Is that it feels good for a bit because the fighting stops internally, right? The internal fighting stops. You have consistent law throughout. You have consistent money throughout. You have consistent weights and measures and a lot of times historians will look at this as a golden age. And Quigley points out, he's like, no, it's gold, like in the sense that a peach is too ripe and it's about to rot. Because the fundamental problem still hasn't gotten fixed, is that the instrument of expansion has been institutionalized. And so at that point, what happens is the civilization enters a period of decay, where, again, going back to today, who, like the whole go to school and get good grades and get a job and raise a family thing. Nobody even vaguely, but the big boomers still do. But the people who are young are like, are you joking? I have no emotional commitment to that idea.
Bingo. Yes.
I'm not going to fight for that idea because it doesn't exist, right? So in ancient Rome, did anybody have a commitment to the Roman idea by the time that the barbarians came in? No one cared. No one wanted to defend it. And Quigley points this out.
In the Durant book on Rome, which is one of these books here, Caesar and Christ, the one on Rome, at the end of the book, by the time you get to the 4th or 5th century, dudes are chopping off their feet so they don't have to be in the Roman army. So,
yeah,
there you
go. So by the time you get there, you're in stage 6, which is decay, which theoretically could go on forever. But it ends when an invading society comes in, because the whole society's like, there's nothing left here. You win.
Yeah.
And Quigley does point out is that societies or civilizations that get invaded in the early stages, like stage 3 or stage 4, they might lose, but the civilization doesn't die.
Greece.
China, when the Mongols took it over.
Yeah.
It was, it was radically changed, but the Mongols became Chinese. The Chinese didn't become Mongols.
Yes.
Right. So, going back to Western civilization, right? Quigley points out that Western civilization is unique out of all the civilizations that we've seen so far, because all these civilizations follow this life cycle of mixture, gestation, expansion, conflict, universal empire decay, and invasion. Except the West. What the West did is they said, okay, mixture. Mixture was the fall of the Roman Empire and the German invaders mixing into a new society. And the instrument of expansion, and actually, but before I, just for completeness sake, the classical civilization, the reason we're defining that as a unique entity is because they had the specific instrument of expansion of slavery. And with slavery, obviously the slave didn't get anything, but if I'm a slave owner, I would own an agriculture unit. I would work out in the field with the slaves, and the surplus would attribute to me.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm there on the slave plantation, I am interested in maximizing the output of my farm. Fast forward to the point where, okay, and then you had to be a farmer with land in order to be in the military. That switches over to anybody who wants to sign up can be in the military. Obviously, we're setting up for some war, expansionist wars going on with that. And because of the financial system, that usury and debt and all that sort of stuff, these people go out to war, find out that their farms have been sold off. They get grouped into these huge latifundia where you just throw these slaves at it, and they were managed by managers. Now, the manager is not interested in maximizing output. The manager is interested in maintaining output. So if you have a good year, that's great, but the next year might be good, and I don't want to be caught in a position where I had a good year to set me up for a bad year.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's the example of the institution of expansion starting to institutionalize and break down. Right? We can go into it more than that, but I just wanted to, for completeness sake, that's what's going on with classical civilization, because as we go into the first stage of Western civilization, which we already talked about, this feudal situation where you've got the groups of people hoarding around the person that can defend them, about a knight on horseback, we find out that the trade, the expansion starts to come from trading luxury goods between manors. And at first, you made the most money by exchanging more goods. But when you start exchanging more goods, they start getting cheaper. And institutionalized vested interests started realizing, wait, we can make more money if we restrict the flow of goods. Stuff, right? And then we start getting into the age of conflict. And I always forget this one. I think it was William the Conqueror in the 11th century.
Okay.
He was so if the core of Western civilization is kind of like the spot where France meets Italy.
Yes.
That England is on the periphery. William the Conqueror was the first person, I might have it wrong, I think I'm right, is the first person to come to make the attempt at universal empire to conquer the whole place, which would have put us into the same rise and fall as everybody else. Yeah. While this happened, a new instrument of expansion formed. This is a circumvention that I was talking about before, which, if I remember correctly, is improvement in shipping technology, boats. So now the old manorial system of trading is just outdated. We could trade way more stuff on these ships that can actually now move up and down the Atlantic, and not that much further. What was it, the 1400s, 1500s? They're making it to the Americas. They're making it around the tip of Africa, making India, all that sort of stuff. So it's essentially like saying, this is my words, not Quigley's, Great William the Conqueror, you won the War of Swords. We just invented muskets.
Yeah.
Have fun, right? You just don't stand a chance against us. This reinvigorated it, created a new instrument of expansion, and this is why this isn't deterministic. Western civilization went back into stage 3.
Okay, so this is unique now.
This is unique. It has another expansion. Now, the same freaking thing happens. At first, we make more money by increasing the flow of goods. Oh, everything got too cheap. Crap. We're going to make more money by restricting the flow of goods. Instrument to institution.
Yep.
This continues until we had another attempt at universal empire. Napoleon.
Okay.
And I mean, at some point, it looks like he has it. Right? I mean, at least the core, because Western civilization in this place is Australia. It's in North America. It's in New Zealand. It's in South Africa. Right? And Napoleon was a little late to the game.
Here's the map. I mean, this is Napoleon's territory. Dylan is not exaggerating. Everything in that kind of reddish, from Spain to Central Europe, that's Napoleon's, down to Italy there, up north there in the Denmark and whatever. So there you go, Dylan, to your point.
Yes. So Napoleon starts grabbing everything, but something started happening in Britain. It was called the Agricultural Revolution. Actually, it had happened earlier, and by the time we get Napoleon, we start seeing the Industrial Revolution. And Quigley points this out, is that the war between Napoleon and Britain was really a war between the old era and the new era. Mm-hmm. The old era was dominated by a 2-tier fallow system for growing food. You have a field that grows food one year, you let it grow fallow the next year, and go back and forth. In Britain, they thought of a new system, which is you have food one year, legumes. Am I saying leguminous crops like clover that reintroduced nitrogen into the soil 1 year? Then you have animals the third year.
Yes. Okay.
And animals obviously have manure that fertilizes the ground. This did two things. First of all, you get way more plant output. And second, now you are interested in keeping animals in as opposed to animals out, and you can control their breeding.
Ah, yes.
So you have this massive food output, which creates a massive population output. I mean, we know the story. It pushes them into the cities, and then the Industrial Revolution happens, right? So now that's the new instrument of expansion. So Napoleon's in the process of winning the War of Muskets. Great. We're inventing machine guns.
Yeah.
Fast forward again. Now we're in the industrial capitalist era where same thing. We make money by producing goods. Oh, wait, now it's all too cheap. We need to start restricting goods. And so we go from what Quigley calls to industrial capitalism to financial capitalism, which is, hey, in order for us to build these new factories, we need to rely on banks, which put a lot of, and the banks go, well, we want a seat on the board, which put a lot of power into the banks' hands. But then these companies started becoming so big they could start self-funding, and so that the banks lost some power in that sense. But now we have monopoly capitalism where we're big enough to just fund whatever we're doing, right? Hitler is the next attempt. So, okay, and we went back to stage 3, expansion. Now we're in stage 4, which is conflict. Hitler's the next attempt. And I mean, again, you look at the map. I mean, it kind of looks like what Napoleon did, right?
Right, yes, yeah.
He loses. And unfortunately, Quigley writes these books about 20 years after he loses. Yeah. So Quigley's going, this is too recent for me to really say what's going on. But if the in between Napoleon and Hitler is dominated by laissez-faire, after Hitler, after World War II, we're dominated by planning.
Yes.
Now, Nima and I in our show, we have done a show going, okay, well, let's talk about what happened to Western civilization after that. Did we enter a new age of expansion? I would argue 100% yes, we did. Look at the boomers. Okay. I mean, population growth, scientific growth, more freedom, more. I mean, all the things that Carroll Quigley lists. I mean, it happened after World War II. Yeah. Then, I mean, I would say roughly, you can make the argument. Let's start it at the Vietnam War. We start seeing this age of conflict happening. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this. You can make the argument where you can say, okay, communism's taken over the world, and there was a legitimate fight to happen there. Or you can make the argument of, hey, this is just America dominating. This is an imperialist war. It's gray. It's kind of gray there. Okay, yeah. By the time we get to 2001 and we're invading Iraq, like, come on, come on. So, I mean, if let's just pick a date and say, let's say 2001 is when the age of conflict happens for the next round. Yeah, fair. I think we can make an argument is that there was another stage 3 and we entered a stage 4 after World War II. And right now we are in stage 4 in the 4th iteration, or this is 4th. So we had feudalism was 1, commercial capitalism was 2. Industrial capitalism was 3, so the boomers. So we're in the 4th age of conflict right now. Yes. So here's my white pill. No black pills allowed. We have done this 4 times before. We could do it a 5th time, and we'd have to. I don't know if we have enough time to dive down deep into this, but Quigley, when you read the evolution of civilizations, and he before he gets into the civilizations, he takes some time to really break down what each of these 7 stages are and signs to look out for in the 7 stages. We are very clearly in stage 4, but there's some components in stage 4 where you get at some point in stage 4, you've got the oppressed masses versus the vested interests, right? And the vested interests are starting these wars to try to divert the masses, and they've got instruments of war. They've got instruments of class oppression. They have instruments of irrationality in order to keep the masses down. I mean, look at the media. Look at the wars that are happening. Look at the academic system producing this absolute insane irrationality that's happening. They have these instruments. Quigley says, once those instruments institutionalize, then it's too late.
Okay.
I do not believe that the instruments have institutionalized yet.
That topic, Dylan, it might be good for a separate episode so that we can give it its proper due.
Yes. And I do want to give one example.
Please.
So would you agree that the Anti-Defamation League is an instrument of class oppression?
Yes.
Did you know that the
Am I allowed to say what class that is?
The Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center, they're twins basically. They train FBI agents and law enforcement.
I did know that, yes.
And they're the ones really promoting, domestic extremism, domestic terrorism, white supremacy, and they are providing the definitions to the law enforcement. Now, and I mean, this is a big deal. It's like, whoa. Who makes those definitions? Is it the government or is it the ADL? Right?
Yeah.
I think this is an example of the instrument of class oppression starting to become the institution of class suppression.
Yes.
If we get to the point, and I mean, this isn't the only thing going on in civilization, right? This is zooming in on this one example. If we get to the point where legal definitions get created by the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center instead of the government, I think we're in a situation where that institutionalization has happened. At that point, it's a too late sort of scenario.
Yeah.
Right. Look at the censorship that happened. We had, I mean, the internet is this perfect example of an instrument of expansion, right? Well, obviously it's become institutionalized. What was the purpose of the internet? Or, well, I mean, I don't know what the CIA or the military decided they wanted it to be in the beginning, but what was it doing in the beginning? It was helping us communicate information and then transfer commerce it developed into. And now it's, how do we stifle that? Well,
perfect, yeah.
What's happening at the exact same time is shows like this. Right?
We're still getting around.
YouTube's canceling everything. Here's BitChute, here's Odyssey, here's Rumble, all this stuff popping up. And right now, the battle is happening.
It's a scramble, it's like a scrimmage.
Are we going to get the new instrument of expansion that circumvents the old one?
And I think this helps explain this dynamic for those of us who watch current events and social events, this dynamic of the archons who seem to be behind the ball. And there's a certain energy of the so-called powers that be to jam things through. And it may be this fight to the knife.
It is. Well, and then I think they're making mistakes. So I think our Illuminati overlords, they've got Carroll Quigley.
Where's that eyeball? You need the eyeball behind you for the Irida TV.
Yeah, right. They've got Carroll Quigley as a playbook. Now, I don't know if they're sitting there reading Carroll Quigley, but I think these ideas are out there, which is why we see stuff like these artificial invasions happening. Like, bringing all these migrants in, these are these artificial invasions. I think they know about this cycle of civilizations, and they're like, let's speed up the invasion that happens at the end. It's like the reverse of what I said at the beginning. If we understand how the forces work, we can, work with them to benefit ourselves. They're going, we understand how these forces work. Let's use them to speed them up and really oppress and conquer and really solidify our vested interest. Yeah. So I argue that the battle is happening right now. And if you throw up your hands in the air and go, it's predetermined, it's fatalistic, I'm blackpilled, you are joining the other side when they're screwing up left and right. They're panicked out. They're freaking. It is not happening. Their playbook is not happening the way it's supposed to be. They're weak. They're freaking weak.
Yeah, I always have this discussion with people, and this will be my final point here, and then I'll kick it to you for some thoughts. Maybe we can set up for our next speech with the audience here. But my final point is that I often do speak of that in private conversations. Is it, are they behind the ball? Or it almost feels, and I guess it's a bit of both, but it almost feels like when you play tag or stealing a base on baseball, where you're hesitant whether you're strong enough to do it, and the forces are in your favor. Can we rush them if we're playing dodgeball or something? Are we good? Are we strong enough yet? Or it's one of those, like, they're not as strong as they make out, or as we black-pilled. You know,
I want to finish the point, but I do want to say this, going back to what I said at the beginning. Their strength is their weakness. The fact that they're this overarching monolithic entity, again, means they have to spend massive resources to accomplish what we can undo with minimal resources.
Yeah.
That's the weakness. But please finish your point.
Yes. I think that's a good cherry on top for kind of where I was going, was the dynamics of strength, or who's strong, who's weak, and I guess it gets into that whole idea of perception and getting right back to free will and all that. So that's my piece there. And
then I guess I'll reemphasize this point. If you want to beat somebody, you want to conquer them, the easiest way to make that happen is to convince your opponent that they can't fight back. So whether or not things are actually fatalistic, if they're already predetermined, there's nothing you can do about it. The fact that you believe that is helping them achieve it. And the fact that, I don't look at that neutrally, like, oh, you're just sitting in the corner doing nothing. No, you are actively helping them, because you are attempting to infect others with, imagine we're getting invaded. We got a walled city, and the Mongols are coming over the mountain to come get us, right? We got to get our act together to fight back with these guys. And if you got somebody running around inside going, we need to give up, we're all going to die, just open the gates. Oh my, what do you do with that guy? You would kill him. Because he's killing everybody's morale. Right?
Yeah.
Or throw him in prison or something. You are actively threatening all of us right now with this crap. So, that's how I feel about people who are black-pilled about this sort of thing.
Well, this is
you're not just neutral, you're actively helping them. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just straight off of a CIA green room, I came across yesterday, talk about black pill and just the lay down Yankee, the war's over, give up Yankee. You remember 2012, how the world was supposed to end?
Yes.
Okay, so this was the latest thing that I came across, and the person was saying that what happened in 2012 is actually we all died in 2012. Did you know that, Dylan? The whole world died. We died in 2012.
I remember. I was there.
and what the craziness of the last 15 years is, the collective consciousness is slowly seeping away, and that's why it gets more and more clownish. The point is, though, it's just one more variation on this lay down Yankee, go home, the war's over, give up, we've won.
I think 2012 was the new age version of the rapture.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Right, which is don't do anything, someone's coming to save you. You're good. And to say kind of the opposite, I was thinking about 2012 yesterday, actually. There was kind of a 2012 awakening in consciousness. We didn't see it right away. But by the time you got to 2015, when the Trump election stuff started happening, and I'm not saying Trump's the awakening. What I'm saying is, he kind of was the symbol of everybody going, hey, wait a minute, I think we can stand back up to this. Yeah. And personally, for me, before Trump got elected, I thought, maybe black-pilled is the right thing. I thought everything was on this plan. Everything was controlled. Every step of the way they got this figured out. And I thought the elections were, this was a big show. And at the end of the day, somebody typed a number into a computer and they said, okay, Obama won. Okay, George Bush Jr. won. I thought it was all that. And when Trump actually won, that's when I realized, wait a minute. They're strong, but they're not God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa. So I think there was some sort of 2012 awakening. It just wasn't, angels singing from the heavens. I get what you're saying. I'm on the same wavelength. Yes. Yeah. But that sort of thing aside, there's so much. And if you listen to my intellectual self-defense series, and particularly when we get to the chain of responsibility, I actually dissect this specifically, is that anything that is offered you on a platter that makes you, that if you eat it and makes you think that you're no longer responsible for your personal actions, it's a trap.
Yes.
Just take this rapture pill, this rapture meal. You make a mental switch in your mind, and guess what? Things are going to get bad, and you don't have to participate. You can just sit back and relax. Know that as soon as things get bad, you're out of here, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
It. Well, before we get out of here, Dylan, where should we take this discussion of maybe where we're at historiography with this idea with Quigley? Where might we kick it in the future?
Well, I mean, I think it'd be fun if we brought the book next time and let's start really going over the details of, okay, this is what expansion looks like. This is what conflict looks like. This is what happened through the phases of Western civilization. Can we see the corollary now? And again, specifically, like I said, with the ADL and Southern Poverty Law Center as an example.
Yes.
If Quigley says that the point of no return is when the instruments become the institutions, can we see a modern corollary and say, okay, has that happened or not? And are we effectively fighting back or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. I like it. So to the audience, thank you for your time and attention. I will, in addition to putting our first conversation where we just lay out the very, very sketchy look at what we really dove into, I'm also going to put the PDF of the evolution of civilization down in the description. You can find out that. You can find out about Irida TV, and when you've subscribed and watched all of Dylan's shows and so forth, then you can check out Apocatastasis and especially Apocatastasis Press. And especially, Dylan, thank you for continuing our discussion about Carroll Quigley.
Thank you for having me on. It, like I said, it's one of my, I ain't no historian, but I really like the topic.
And here you go.
Thank you.